Hey, welcome back. I'm Eric Kane. This is the second second time I've recorded this video. My first take was more like spitting obscenities and just like super annoyed with the stupidity of the piece we're about to get into. But I wanted to go a little deeper and maybe not say "fuck you, you fucking idiot" quite so many times, even though in my heart that's what I'll be thinking as we move through this piece. Okay, so this is a subject I touched upon just recently. There is a mission in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2's single-player campaign where two Mexican Special Forces operators climb the border wall into Texas, pursuing a terrorist who's being smuggled into the United States by heavily armed cartel members. Remember this, you are playing as a Mexican soldier in this mission. And as I discussed in my last video, some of the game journalists covering this couldn't get that detail right, describing it as you're playing Task Force 141, which you are not. Task Force 141 is a multinational elite unit. In this game, you do play as members of Task Force 141. Throughout most of the game, you play as Soap or Gaz, and you follow around Ghost and Captain Price, and these are all UK citizens. But in this mission, you are a Mexican Special Forces operator. You are following a man named Hassan, and you make your way into an American neighborhood filled with small houses and trailers. It's not exactly a trailer park, but it's kind of like a hybrid neighborhood with trailers and houses in it. You start moving through people's yards. There's dogs barking. You can hear your quarry up ahead. They're smashing things and people yelling, and you know that they're dangerous, heavily armed bad guys. But the people in the houses don't know who's good, who's bad. As far as they're concerned, there's probably some criminals who've just gone over the border and are going through your property. So you encounter some very hostile civilians in this moment. The first one comes out of his trailer house, yelling, angry, and in order to de-escalate the situation, you are directed to point your gun at him. Not shoot him, just point your gun at him, and then you move on past. There you encounter another civilian inside his home because you're following these guys through this guy's house. He's upset. He comes at you with a bat. Again, you point your gun at him. He backs down, moves away. Eventually, you come to a pair of civilians that look kind of like gangbangers, and they don't go so quietly into this good night. They draw their weapons and start to fire back at you, and you have to, unfortunately, shoot them. Throughout this scene, your commanding officer, Alejandro, he mentions, and of course this is all in Spanish. This whole scene takes place. You're speaking Spanish. The Americans are speaking English. But he mentions that we're not supposed to be here. We're moving to people's homes. There's this idea, we're on this mission. We have to go quickly. We have to chase these bad guys down. We're trying to catch them, but let's try to be respectful. Obviously, in an ideal situation, Mexican Special Forces would not be moving through an American neighborhood, pointing their weapons at civilians. None of this is presented as like a good thing. Being there in the first place is going beyond their jurisdiction. It's illegal, but time is of the essence. Hassan has these American-made missiles that he's gotten hold of, and he's going to probably shoot them at American targets. So you're doing a solid for the CIA, and as you move through this neighborhood, you de-escalate the situation by pointing your weapon at civilians and then moving on. The game journalists who are covering this as though it is the worst thing since the Holocaust keep getting the details wrong. And we talked about Polygon's article and their mistake of Task Force 141 yesterday. Now we're going to go to my favorite gaming website, thegamer.com, where Stacey Henley has written an article titled, "Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is a sickening exercise in manufacturing consent." Now that's a little Marxist term for you. Manufacturing consent. Throughout the article, this phrase is not explained. As a reader, you are simply supposed to assume what it means. But it's taken. Well, there's the story of the history of the phrase manufacturing consent is it goes back a ways. It derives from the manufacture of consent used by Walter Lippmann in his treatise Public Opinion, and was then taken by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky. And, probably everyone's heard of Noam Chomsky. He's communist intellectual. I actually really think he produces some interesting critiques of American power, American empire, capitalism, and all that. But it's taken from they use that in their book Manufacturing Consent: The Political Economy of the Mass Media, which came out in 1988. And I'm just quoting Wikipedia at this point because it's the quickest source for all this. It argues that the mass communication media of the U.S., quote, are effective and powerful ideological institutions that carry out a system-supportive propaganda function by reliance on market forces, internalized assumptions, and self-censorship, and without overt coercion. So what that means is that through mass media, through the news media, through all the media we consume, we are consuming essentially pro-Western, pro-American propaganda. It's like a soft propaganda rather than just like overt propaganda that there's these internalized assumptions and, just the basis of all media sort of helps reinforce beliefs that the West is the best, that America is the greatest country, et cetera, right? So there's not... What's kind of funny about this is that manufactured consent is like, the concept here is that it's an overarching practice. It's not just one specific thing or another. It's taking place in almost an invisible manner, right? Manufactured consent is taking place all the time in all the media we consume. You don't go around and say, if you want to say this is a piece of propaganda, like an individual piece of propaganda, you just go out and say this is a piece of propaganda. You wouldn't necessarily go out and say this is a piece of manufactured consent. That's just an odd way to frame. Like if Stacy here wants to say that this scene in Call of Duty is propaganda, she should just come right out and say this is propaganda, because saying it's a exercise in manufacturing consent is very strange, considering that the whole concept of manufacturing consent is one that it is very subtle and that it happens below the surface, really below our conscious level. So let's see what she has to say about this scene. I will start by saying that she clearly has not played this mission, just like the author in the Polygon piece had clearly not played this mission. It's very common for game journalists not to even bother playing the games that they criticize, or putting out enough effort to actually just play it so that you can have a better context, a deeper understanding of what you're actually then going to spend time writing about, having an opinion about. All right. So after talking about how basically Call of Duty is just like rah, 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 go army, although anyone who's played Call of Duty long enough knows that often the bad guys in Call of Duty are not just the terrorists. They're not just the Russians. There are also often bad guys, including in this game, who are the Americans. Spoiler alert, but one of the main bad guys in Modern Warfare 2 is a private military contractor, and another is an American general. So it's not quite as like glamorized war and rah rah go United States were number one as people say it is, especially because you pretty much play as Brits, a Scottish guy, and a Mexican guy throughout the game. So she talks about how it's mostly just things going boom and it's not that political, but sometimes they touch on political stuff and yada yada yada. However, Modern Warfare 2 has the clearest example of manufacturing consent that I have ever seen in a piece of media. Whoa! The clearest example of manufacturing consent that she has ever seen in a piece of media. In one level of Modern Warfare 2's campaign, you are in the middle of a tense situation. What's the situation, Stacy? Where's the context? Just a tense situation? Okay. When civilians shuffle out of their hut, frightened. Civilians shuffle out of their hut, frightened. An angry civilian bursts out of his trailer and he's pissed off. He does not shuffle out of a hut. Does Stacy think that this takes place in a third world country where there are huts? Having not played the mission, I suppose you could make that mistake. But it sort of immediately undermines everything she's about to say, because she thinks that the civilians shuffle out of their hut frightened, which is not what happens literally in this scene. Which, I've played this mission twice, so I think I speak with the most basic, elementary amount of knowledge required. A prompt comes on the screen telling you to press LT or your equivalent to de-escalate the situation. The result of this is to point your gun at them. Yes, you have to aim down sights and point your gun at them, which has the effect of making this hostile and angry civilian back up into his house and go away. It effectively de-escalates the situation. And later, when a man comes at you with a bat, you do the same thing, and it de-escalates the situation. Now, remember, in this tense situation, you are on the clock. You are running as fast as you possibly can through a dark American neighborhood, chasing down a terrorist and some cartel members. This ends in lots of shooting, as Call of Duty often does. But you're not supposed to shoot the civilians unless you absolutely have to in that one moment with the gangbangers. But let's see how Stacy describes it. When I first heard about this, I thought it was a joke. An exaggerated parody of what a Call of Duty game might do. In some Call of Duty games, you have to go through houses where there are civilians and you don't know which of them is going to be a terrorist, and you accidentally shoot innocent people. In Modern Warfare 2019, there's the Piccadilly mission. You literally are going through brownstones with people inside that may or may not be terrorists, and you have to think on your feet. You might, you don't know who's going to grab a gun and shoot at you. So this is actually way tamer than that. So again, having this even rudimentary knowledge of the game you're talking about here would help a little bit. You do not offer aid to the citizens, attempt to calm them down, or direct them to safety and shelter. What aid? They're not hurt. They're coming out of their house, misunderstanding what's going on, and you tell them to get back inside, to safety and shelter. And you are calming them down. You are actually taking their anger and hostility and trading it for some fear, because that fear is going to keep them safe in this situation. They should not be out on the streets where a shootout between Mexican special forces and cartel members is about to take place. You do not offer aid to citizens, attempt to calm them down, or direct them to safety and shelter, but instead meet fear with violence, stamping your boot down on the situation's neck. God, what a turn of phrase, Stacy. No, you don't meet fear with violence. You meet anger with fear, and you de-escalate the situation. You don't shoot them. They don't require aid. By aiming at defenseless and terrified citizens, the game rewards you. No, you don't aim at, somewhat defenseless, but not terrified. Again, these are angry citizens who mistake the situation, and when you point your gun at them, back the fuck down. That's kind of what the point of it is. It doesn't reward you. You just keep moving and you forget about it almost instantly, because the purpose of this scene is not to calm down citizens. It's not to provide them shelter and safety, or to give them succor and aid. It's to get after the terrorist. If you played this mission, you would know what it was about. This, you are told, is the correct way to act. Thank you, Call of Duty. The next time that I team up with the Mexican Special Forces and go into the United States after terrorists, I'll be sure to know how to act. Is Stacy implying that this somehow teaches us how to act in real life? That we'll play this game and then go into real life situations? And when we see defenseless and terrified civilians, we'll point our guns at them? Is this the critique being offered up by the editor-in-chief of The Gamer? It underlines that unquestioned fascist authority, that immediate threat of mortal violence, and an overriding sense of might makes right is the correct and proper way to act when faced with those weaker than you. Stacy, if you'd played the mission, you'd realize how fucking stupid you sound right now. I realize that it's more important to you to make political statements and toss around Marxist phrases like manufactured consent without explaining or really even understanding what they mean. But you're talking about a video game right now, and you haven't even played the mission in question. I mean, you haven't even watched it. Maybe you watched the one scene and mistook that trailer for a hut, but I don't think you did. I think maybe you read that Polygon piece and then wrote your own. And you tried to sound smarter by using phrases like manufactured consent, but you sound like a fucking idiot. Oh, sorry, I'm doing it again. I'm devolving into insults and personal attacks. The problem is you do sound like one because you didn't do your homework. And you're bandying about words and phrases that either you don't understand or you just assume everyone else is going to without any explanation. You can call this a piece of propaganda, but get the facts right. What kind of propaganda? Because here's what I see with this scene. I see Mexican soldiers pointing their guns at American citizens, and I think that's a little bit subversive. Because normally we would see American soldiers pointing their guns at foreign civilians, right? Chasing down a terrorist in the streets of Kabul or Baghdad, and when citizens start acting up, pointing their guns at them and getting them to calm down and get out of their way. That's what you'd normally see. This scene actually turns that on its head and imagines, what if foreign troops were on our soil? Huh? It's a lot more interesting than just unquestioned fascist authority and might makes right. That isn't a critique of this scene. It's not even applicable to this scene. Killing other soldiers in Call of Duty is just what an army game is about. You can apply all schools of thought to whether we should gamify warfare in this way, but society has already decided the answer is yes. Holding unarmed innocents at gunpoint is not usually part of the deal, and by labeling this as a way to de-escalate the situation, it is attempting to set a new normal. Our consent is being manufactured in real time. Oh my God, it's just so goddamn sophomoric. Like, go back to school. Go back to school. Because this is not how you discuss manufacturing consent. It's... okay. All right. The incident is far worse than Call of Duty's bigger acts. What bigger acts? What are you referring to, Stacy? Because of how insidious it is. There are a lot of awful things in war games. They train us to demonize foreigners. Like how you're demonizing the Mexican special operatives in this mission. To see violence as the answer, to find solace in collateral damage when innocents are killed. No, not usually, actually. Throughout this mission, Alejandro mentions that we're in other people's homes. We're not supposed to be here. There's this idea that this is bad. We don't want civilians to get hurt. That's the whole point of like pointing your gun at them, is to get them to go back inside and get out of the way and not get hurt. Because if they attack you and you have to fight them off, they're going to. Even in like No Russian, the most controversial and provocative scene in Call of Duty history, where civilians really are killed, it's certainly not seen as just collateral damage. It's a horrifying scene. We see the impact of this in real life, whether it be rise in hate crimes, a rush of impressionable teens running off to war to defend our heavily fortified and at zero risk soil from those dang Iraqis, or international press looking the other way when the West blows up schools that were near military targets. However, with these things, Call of Duty is part of a much larger campaign to manufacture consent. Again, this is just such a juvenile understanding of what manufacturing consent even means. It's not a campaign. The whole point of manufactured consent is that these things are happening without motive, that they are happening without visibility, that they are happening under the surface, that is not a conspiracy, but that is just the way the market, the capitalistic society functions. That these things are occurring without even attempting to make them occur. And I'm not even saying this the way I want to because I'm just annoyed right now. She's also implying that there's a rise in hate crimes because of war games or a rush of impressionable teens running off to war. I love that apparently our soil is at zero risk. I mean, granted, we do have a pretty awesome like army and stuff, but did we miss 9/11 happening? It just reads like some freshman in college who doesn't really understand their own political beliefs. It's like a pretend Marxist. They think socialism is cool, so they just call themselves a socialist, but don't actually understand any of the stuff they're talking about. That's how this reads to me. I'm sure there's there's probably some really interesting socialist critiques of Call of Duty. Like, we could probably get into that, but this is not that. When Call of Duty sends us into war zones to run through Afghan villages in search of insurgents, it's only following decades worth of movies and television shows that have already glamorized every aspect of warfare. Even movies that seek to be more insightful by examining the cost of war tend to focus on the trauma of U.S. troops sent to destroy the homes of Iraqi citizens, rather than the Iraqi citizens themselves. Media has systemically trained us to center ourselves in these narratives, however we feel about the conflicts. But Modern Warfare 2 takes this to such an intimate level that it reminds us how sickening it is to be playing war so readily. I guess it's worse when Mexican soldiers are in an American neighborhood than when American soldiers are in an Afghanistan neighborhood. Is that what Stacy's arguing? Oh, right, never mind. Stacy didn't even play the fucking game. Bravo, the gamer. Keep doing it, man. You guys make every other gaming outlet out there look good by comparison. And that says a lot. I'm impressed. Peace.